Hello, it's Henry again, and this is the introduction to my video on RV boondocking. The nickname, if you will, for camping in remote sites is the boondocks. And when you camp in an RV in the boondocks, and hence then you have no support with electric and water and so forth, you're said to be boondocking, and this is the sobriquet that we give this type of RV camping. It requires certain techniques, and it requires a reasonable amount of RV, some additional technology. But a lot of us can take what our RV would normally have and stretch it a little bit, and then you can decide how far you want to stretch it. In my case, my goal is to stretch the window to 7 days, so that you might want to go in, say, every week and get new salads or fruit or something like that, so that this kind of this week long time where you're not fussing over logistical things, and then you can do the things that you are camping. So the rationale for me is I like remote places, and although I don't know when I'll ever get out west with my RV where the boondocking is much more common, I still like the feeling. Here in Ontario, we have parks that have sites that are not powered, that are often a little bit more remote in the park proper than some of the powered sites, and that can make them interesting. There are also some parks that do not have any power at all, and so again, if you have the setup or the techniques involved or both, you can enjoy that park and still live in a nice RV. For me, I also find that a lot of the powered areas are very tight. They're very close to the next group of people. There's often no privacy at all. And I also find they're often pretty noisy. There's a lot of kids. A lot of parents have their kids with electric cars or playing games of one kind or another and so forth. That's not what I really want to do when I come out to the woods. There's often people playing music and so forth. And having the ability to go to these more remote sites where there's no power generally really changes the clientele, because you lose the capability of all the electronics and so forth. The parks generally work on a policy where the users have to complain before they'll do anything, and it's a little disappointing. You're paying pretty significant camping fees, $50-something a night with taxes here in Ontario, and you still basically have to complain because people are behaving irresponsibly. A park is not a playground. It's not a recreation area in the sense that, in my view, a park is different. It is a communication with nature, and this is the time for us to explore and live differently than if we were at a commercial campground, let's say. So the issues that you face in doing boondocking are, of course, going to be equipment based. What do you have to do to your RV to improve its systems so that you can stretch out your time, whether it's stretch it to 3 or 4 days, or to stretch it to the 7, or perhaps even longer. And when you're dealing with fixed consumables and so forth, whatever you waste, it's gone, and you can't recover it. And so there's a discipline in operating with this that's different than just, doing your thing at home and not worrying. There's endless water, there's endless electricity, and all the rest. You don't really think about those things. You don't have to worry about your holding tank getting full. You just do your thing. And when you're RVing, and of course it's a vacation, so not everybody wants to have constraints on them when they're playing and when they're on their vacation time. And I understand that. And so when I'm boondocking, I generally try to follow a set of principles. And this is entirely a voluntary thing. You do whatever you want. I'm a bit of a purist, so my view is that you're allowed to use whatever you bring with you. You can't use the toilets or the showers or anything in the park. You can't use electricity from the park. You can't throw your trash in the dumpsters in the park, and all that. You can use the fire pit to burn garbage if you wanted to do that, but it's all a matter of staying contained within the vehicle, what you brought with you, the consumables, and the equipment with you that you can use to augment that. And so that's sort of how I look at it now. So there's some times when I'll pretty much be boondocking, but I might use the trash at a park or something like that, and I'm okay with that. But technically, if you're in remote site, you won't have any of those opportunities. So you want to kind of think it through, and remember that you want to practice a bit of this kind of stuff when you don't really have to, so that were it to become possible, you have a system, you have an understanding. I think you also have to talk to the people who are with you, that they agree and understand and enjoy necessarily this type of camping. And if you have a partner, you might well be okay with that. But as you start adding people, and especially younger people and so forth, it can get complicated. And you want to start off, stretching it one day longer, maybe a second day longer, and so on, because it's hard to get 3 or 4 people all going in the same direction. So anyhow, that's the overview of all of this, and so we'll move on then, because there's all these different systems on board the vehicle. So okay, so let's just talk in general terms about what you might have to do to your RV, where the problem's going to be, and what can you realistically do. And I'll come back to these in some detail, but one of the biggest problems that most RVs will have is electricity. You're generally given 1, maybe 2 deep cycle lead acid batteries. These will give you the neighborhood of 100 amp hours of capability. So that's going to be at 12 volts. You'll have about 100 hours at 1 amp. Now you have to, if you don't understand electricity very well, it can be a bit of a difficulty. But one of the things you're going to need, if you're going to do this at all, is you're ultimately going to need a battery monitoring system to understand exactly how much is in your batteries. The devices in most RVs that will tell you how far their batteries are filled or not are useless. You need a proper device that's going to really give you the kind of control and input that you need. And remember that lead acid batteries may well be rated for, say, 200 amp hours, but you can only use half that capacity in your RV before you damage the battery on average. So you're looking at the situation is, so now, okay, you've got this minimal amount of electricity in a typical trailer or even a driven RV. But then the idea is, okay, what are you going to do? And you start looking at what your RV starts to use, and it's not difficult at all for an RV to consume 30, 40 amp hours a day. And that's without doing anything. This is just the refrigerator and the basic circuits and so forth. And so a lot of times, even with 2 deep cycle batteries, basically you can do a night. You can come into, let's say, a Walmart, do a bit of stuff in the evening, stay overnight. It'll keep the fridge going and some things. But by morning, you have your breakfast. Your batteries have pretty much had it. And so you can do that with it. But if you're wanting to stay, for longer, like suggesting this week, you have to have a greater battery capacity, and you have to have a way of augmenting the battery's abilities. And that can come, generally speaking, either with generators or solar. Now, the generator can either be on board the vehicle or it'd be one that you buy. It's increasingly common for many parks to ban generators. I know some of them are actually getting to be very quiet, and you may not even know they're running, and you can take a chance, I guess, of whether or not the rangers will come along and ask you to turn it off. But So that's a challenge. I noticed, like with the internal generator on my vehicle, it's a 2018. That's an Onan QG 5500, and it's pretty quiet. I mean, really, when you're, I don't know, maybe 50 feet away, you can hardly hear the thing. So it's pretty remarkable. But anyhow, so that's one option you have, and it's certainly the option that you'd probably want to do if you're watching your money, because the solar is far more expensive. It's very effective and all the rest, but it is far more expensive. So the generator's on board, then you don't have to worry about anything as long as it's not too noisy. If you're going to get a generator on the outside, I'd recommend you get at least a 2,000 watt generator. It has to be an inverter generator, and you want to have it super quiet. Generally speaking, I'd recommend it be rated around 48 dB or less to really keep it quiet. The ones that are up around 60, they're pretty noisy, to be honest with you. When you're sitting in a wilderness setting, you really can't put it behind something or cover it or anything like that really effectively. It just doesn't work. And again, because you only have so much stuff you can carry with you. So the option that many of us choose is solar. Now the solar is not only the panels, but you have the wiring, which isn't too bad, the solar controller, and then ultimately the other thing, whether it's is to get these higher performance batteries. And this is what I have decided to do in my system. Now, I could have made a bigger system if we were able to boondock more aggressively than we are. So what I have is a compromise. I have 400 hours of lithium iron phosphate batteries and 800 watts on the roof. Now, what does that tell us? You can use about 80% of a lithium battery without too much worry. So it takes you down around 320 amp hours plus or minus. If your RV is run responsibly, you can probably get by in a day with about 100 amp hours. Sometimes a bit less, but not much. And that's not hard for it to be over that. So you can probably get 3 days. Now remember, when you arrive at, say, in Ontario Parks, you can't get there till 2 o'clock, but you're in the second half of the day, evening time. So you're going to come into the evening with your batteries pretty much right to the top. And so your first day really is the second day. And then at the other end, you're leaving by lunchtime or even 1 o'clock or something in the afternoon. So that last day is also a day where you don't really care if your batteries are flat, because you're going to start the engine of your vehicle and charge them up as you're driving home. So what you really have in say a 5-day, 4-night trip is 3 full days and maybe a half of battery power. So you kind of can cheat a little bit with the numbers. And so in that particular case is and the other side of it is if you have the solar panels on the roof. Now, solar panels have this unique thing that if you shade a part of the panel, that part then becomes quite resistive to electrical flow. And it doesn't take a lot of shade for that to happen. And so what you want to be careful of is you don't want to have, for example, all your panels connected together, because then if one panel is shaded, it really defeats the purpose of the other ones. On the other hand, if you have them all singly, you can run a lot of wires down through your RV, and that can also be, and it also reduces the voltage and therefore increases the current and therefore the amount of energy you lose. So there's often compromises. What I did is I have 8 panels, 100 watts each, and I paired my panels in twos. So I have basically 4 sets. And that way, if one of the panels is slightly covered, the other 3 sets are going to work just fine. I found that because we don't get the sun directly overhead, you're going to take a hit. And the highest I think I've ever had on my panels was 680 watts, which is 80%. And that didn't happen for very often. I think in a day, for me, I think I only had a few days over 200 amp hours, a full day charge. And we'll see how that goes this spring, because I've decided when my RV is here at the house, I'm going to also charge the electric car and part with the solar on the RV because it's free. And so we'll be able to see how effective the charging of the batteries happens to be. But that angle of the sun, and I did the experiment, I think it was in October, and it charged the car about a quarter or so of the batteries just fine. But it took a week for the batteries to come back because the sun angle is so low in October. that you just don't get enough. So it's really something you're going to be doing, say, between the 21st of March and the 21st of September, you know, something like that, which is typically the camping season anyway. So what does it mean is that if you get, on a good day, you can get over 200 amp hours. For the most part, you're going to get yesterday back, maybe the day before. And if you have a cloudy day and you have full sun, you should get 50 amp hours. You might get a little more. You might get, it might be 45. So the point is that if you need about 100 a day, then every 2 days you're going to get back, and you're going to get another day. So the nice part of it is that with this setup that I have is kind of a compromise. I could put a lot more solar on the roof. It's all a matter of costing. Is that I can go 3 to 4 days with no solar because my batteries can do it. And then if we're doing a shorter trip, we might not even care, and we can camp right underneath the trees and not even worry about the solar and just take the hit on the batteries. If we have, say, 3 days, 2 nights, I wouldn't even worry about it. 4 days, 3 nights, we might be a little careful, but probably could still make it. And whereas if you're doing the longer trip, now you want to have a site that has more sun, so you have to look that up on the sites and see if you can find sites that look like they're going to be more exposed. And then you'll be fine, in theory. And it works out pretty well. Now, costing wise, my solar thing, so I'd say the panels cost me about $1,000, and that'll include the brackets to mount them on the roof, the wires down to the panel, maybe another $100. These are all Canadian dollars, and then the controller I think was about $300, and a breaker and a couple of breakers and so forth, and that was about it. So $1,500, say, for the panels and the whole thing, and then another $3,300 for the batteries, something like that. So we're looking at about $6,000, maybe not quite, but pretty close. So that's that's not free, and I find the prices. I deal with Renogy and Canada, and I really find the products have worked really well. The prices are reasonable. They have a lot of specials, so I'm pretty satisfied. So the battery monitoring, I should point out as well, is that the battery monitor device, in the older RV, I had a dial on the console and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to get away from that in the newer RV, and so what I did was I bought what they call a smart shunt. And this is just a device that you run your current through, and then it will it'll broadcast on Bluetooth to your cell phone, and you get an application on your cell phone, and it tells you what your batteries are doing. I do the same thing with the solar performance. You add a device called the BT1. I think there's a second version of that now, and that connects to your solar charge controller. And again, through Bluetooth, you can read what your panels are doing, how much energy you've stored in the day, all that kind of thing. And it's quite good. I find the BT's range is better than the Smart Shunt. Smart Shunt is a Victron product, which is a very well-respected company as well. But I find the range for the Victron is not quite as good as it is with the BT1. But nevertheless, it works very well. And so you have all this going on inside, and you don't see anything, and it works great. So that's the challenge of the standpoint of equipment modifications to the RVs. You're going to have an increased amount of electrical storage one way or the other, and you're going to have a way to augment that as you use up the power, be it a generator or some kind of solar. And if you're not electrically inclined, you're going to have to do a little bit of learning about the basic principles of electricity and how you measure these things, and get used to understanding how much these different devices on board will consume things. And you're going to have to, as I'll talk in a second video on this, you're going to learn about how to use your equipment on board to try to minimize those types of issues. So the next thing that you're going to have to really be careful of and concern yourself with is water uses. Water, you're going to find that no matter how big the tanks are in your RV, they're too small. And so you've got a freshwater tank, in my case, is about 300 liters. Unfortunately, the tap for the outlet to the pump is on the side instead of underneath. And so as the tank drains, it runs out, it'll vacuum into the pump at around, say, 50 liters remaining or something to that effect. And so that's unfortunate because you then don't really get the 300 liter capacity you're supposed to have. But the point is, again, you got to know that, and then you can plan accordingly. On the other side, you have your effluent tanks. Now, in this particular vehicle, the Blackwater, which is the toilet, is about 45 gallons US, and that's generally plenty for 2 people for about 10 days. And so I wouldn't worry about that one too much. You'll have to see and get used to your situation. One of the challenges is a lot of these RVs have these long, flat tanks. And if you have your toilet above those, oftentimes, and I know this is a difficult thing to say online, but you can end up with debris piling up under the toilet, and you're going to have some way to move it around so that it can float and distribute itself across the entire tank, or you'll think your tank is full long before it really is. Like, I understand that's a bit of a disgusting topic, but it's a fact of life. But the tank that's going to overflow fastest by far is what we call gray water. That's your kitchen sink, your shower, and your hand washing sink. And there's really, so this is the challenge. I would say 90% of the fresh water you have will go down the sink one way or the other. So you're going to have to find ways to minimize the shower usage and the sink usage. These are operational procedures, generally more than equipment changes. So you're really kind of stuck with the systems. Now, the only things you can do is a couple of things. One is you can, as you'll see here on the video, I'll show it to you after this, is what we call an auxiliary gray water tank. And this one I have is about 150 liters or something. And you can dump your water into this, and then that can be towed somewhere and dump it. To keep the rules, so to speak, with boondocking that I hold, as long as you dump it in there and you just leave it there until you're finished camping and take it away the day you leave, that's perfectly fine. To augment the water that's on the other side, again, if the rule is you can't source water from the park, or there isn't a park, you can bring water with you. Now, what I've got is, right now I have 3 or 4 rather, of these jerry can style water jugs. Now, they're about 23 liters, which is about as heavy as you'd want them to be, because that weighs about almost 50 pounds. Certainly, yeah, pretty close to 50 pounds when they're full. So you're pulling 2 of those, you note it. So I put potable water in those. Generally speaking, if we go through 2 of those, we are fine, which means we'd have 2 left over to augment what goes into the freshwater tank, which is great. So we could end up with another, 80 odd liters in there. And that's going to get you another day and a half, 2 days, whatever it is, which is nice. The question is that a lot of Class A style RVs, the water fill is not a gravity fill. You have to have a pressurized hose to fill the tank. And for a while, I was stumped on how to manage this. I had all kinds of silly ideas on how to do this. But I'll show you in a companion video here. I've got a way that we can get this water into the tank without too much trouble. So we won't get into detail just now. So that's sort of what you can do. You can bring some extra water, figure out how to get it into your freshwater tank, depending on your RV, and you can use this auxiliary gray water tank. I would never use, I would never put black water in one of those. You'll never clean it, not in a million years. I just don't think I would support that. I think it's, but the gray water, absolutely. You won't know it's there, and like I say, it flows pretty well. Remember also that you shouldn't be dumping gray water on the land unless you have express permission. Rules are rules, and there's so many people around now, we have to recognize that we have to follow those types of regulations. The other things that, from the standpoint of modifying your vehicle, there's not too much else you can do in the general sense of it. I've put a ceiling fan in, a fantastic fan to improve ventilation when the vehicle gets warm. If it's in the sunshine, that's a concern. And everybody's RV is going to be a little different along those lines. Another thing that you can do to improve the ventilation is these small personal fans, and you'll see these appear on the screen here. There's the standard 4-inch ones you can get that plug into the outlet, and then there's the ones that you can just simply plug into the USB port. Now the USB ones operate on probably a third or even maybe less power than the other ones do and provide largely the same amount of cooling. So I would certainly recommend going with the USB ones. Now, if your RV doesn't have a lot of USB ports or 12-volt ports, you can always use the extension cord and the adapters or a long USB extension cord so that the fan is wherever you want it to be, so that you can provide yourself with that ventilation without having to have to use the inverter and waste electricity. You've got the issue of trash. So you can burn things, and that's not entirely, you know, that's certainly an option. I've come to the point that those of us who like to go into the natural places should be doing everything we can to protect those places and by extension our Earth. And so I think having fires just for the sake of them, I think it's just really, I think in time we're really going to have to look at whether campfires should be allowed for campgrounds. I don't have a problem with people on canoe trips to have them, but to sit at the campfire and burn, you know, 100 pounds of wood and produce all the carbon footprint that produces in a night, when, you know, you could have some other kind of device and still tell your sea stories. I just think it's something. I've been in Algonquin Park where the smoke from the campfires is so bad that it's a traffic hazard when you come around the corner from some of the campgrounds that are near the road. And I just don't know if that's a good idea. I was in Sleeping Giant Park one time. The smoke in there was so bad, it affected our eyes and our throats. I was at Bon Echo one time, and in the hollows, the smoke just hung there all night. And you've got kids sleeping there. I mean, you might as well have them sleep beside a steel plant. I think we should reconsider what we're doing. In Europe, there are no campfires. They don't let you have them. So maybe we have to think that over somehow. Your propane and your gasoline usage and so forth aren't going to be any real issues. You should go to a park where most generators and RVs will have a hose into the tank that'll run dry when the tank's about a quarter full. And this prevents you from running your tank completely dry so that you can't drive the RV. So you'd want to go into a campsite with a, you know, say 5/8 to full tank, so that if you do need the generator, you've got lots of room. Generators don't use that much gas anyway, so it would take quite a while. I know I ran my generator for 5 days one time, and I think it was like maybe it burned about a third of the tank or something like that. And that was like night and day because it was so hot. We needed the air conditioning. You're going to have to think about your clothing. You're going to have to, and of course the propane, in these situations, you're going to use propane for the refrigerator, which isn't going to be very much. Your hot water heater, and you're only going to heat hot water when you need hot water. You're not going to heat it all the time. And in the summertime, the water in the tanks is already, you know, 20, 25 C anyway, so the heating of it up to a hot temperature is easier than it is, say, it's 0 degrees. So that's kind of nice. And then the only thing else you might be using it for is if you have a barbecue attached to the RV. Now, I do that because if we cook on the barbecue, first, I like the taste of it, and secondly, we're not using, you know, a 10 or 15 amp hours with the George Foreman grill or whatever inside. So it's pretty helpful that way. Okay, so I'm going to end this segment here now, and then we're going to get back into the things that we need to do in each case with the actual techniques of operation to make some of these things work the way we'd like them to. Okay, so this video now is going to be on procedures with respect to your electrical system. I'm going to make the first assumption I'm going to be working with the system I have. That gives me 4 lithium iron phosphate batteries of 100 amp hours each, so roughly 320 or so usable amp hours, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, and 800 watts of solar on the roof, and a 5,500 watt generator on board. Now my intention is to never use the generator, and I would only use it if I had to. I'm not afraid to using it, but I would sooner try to make the trip run where we don't hear anything, and somehow magically, so to speak, we were able to operate. I'm going to, before I leave on my spreadsheets, based on what I know that I'm doing, I can calculate what I expect my daily electrical usage to be, which will average somewhere between 100 and 130 amp hours. And then based on the time of day and hopefully the campsite, I can estimate what I'm going to expect to pick up from the solar panels. If I'm extending my trip up to 7 days, which is the point of this video, then I'm going to try to find a way to have a site that is pretty clear and open so that I have some ventilation, because it can get very close and clammy inside like a forest at night. So sometimes if you're out, you know, where it's more open, you can get a bit more of a breeze, and it can be a bit nicer that way. And of course, to get the solar. If you're in an open setting, even on a cloudy day, you're still going to probably get 50, 60 amp hours of power, which is, you know, it's going to be enough. Because again, you know, Ontario has quite changeable weather. So to have 5 or 6 days, which are all inclement and very dark and cloudy, would be very, very rare in the summertime. So, you know, you may not get those days where you're going to get 250, 300 amp hours of charge, but you're going to get a lot of them. You're going to get 150, 160, which is more than enough to repair the damage from the day before. And remembering that we have 320, so we could certainly get 2, 2.5, and even 3 days if we squeeze it. So we should be okay to recover and almost indefinitely. That being said, I always like to try to be ahead of the power situation as best I can. And so one of the things that you look at is first say, okay, well, what are the things that are going to cause me the most trouble? And there's 2 ways to look at it. One is heavy current use. But generally speaking, the devices with heavy current use, you don't run them for very long. You know, like a toaster or a hairdryer, or which I wouldn't probably use anyway, or a George Foreman grill or something to that, a kettle. All these things may well take you know, 1,000 watts, but they only run for a few minutes and they're done. The other side of it is a medium draw, but that runs either all the time. So for example, the RV might have the refrigerator and its basic systems and the inverter running, and that might say be, I don't know, maybe that's 2 amps, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you're running it for 24 hours a day. Now it's 48 amp hours per day. That's half your use right there. So that becomes a problem. So there's kind of 2 systems you have to think about. Now, what do you want to, of course, do is you figure this all out in advance, and then you have a set of procedures you follow, and then you don't have to think about it all the time and drive yourself crazy. And you just check it. I just take readings once or twice a day. It takes me a couple of minutes, and I'll know if I'm in trouble or not. And and there's different ways to do things depending on the systems. So if we're down in the situation where we really do need to conserve power, you can do things like when you get up in the morning, you can turn off the refrigerator. And you can leave it off from the time you get up till you do your post-sleep activities. You have your breakfast, if you're making a lunch because you're going to go somewhere or whatever. And the other thing you need to get with your refrigerator, no matter whether you're boondocking or not, is one of those radio remote thermometer things, so that you have a display all the time in your RV where you can move it around of the temperature of the inside of the fridge. And then and I always put that sensor as high in the fridge as I can. So therefore that temperature is the highest temperature in the fridge probably. So everything else further down is cooler than what I expect. So if I wake up in the morning and I see the temperature in the fridge you can generally map it to set the temperature appropriate for the temperature outside, so that your fridge doesn't have to run more than it needs to. And that also helps you as well. But if you wake up in the morning and let's say the fridge temperature is, I don't know, 2.5 C or something like that. So then I turn the fridge off and I have that display. I'm having my breakfast, I'm doing computer stuff, whatever I'm doing. And maybe the temperature gets to 2.5 or sorry, 5.5 or something like that. And it might not get up that fast depending on how much you're opening the door until you're actually ready to go out and do whatever activity you might be doing for the day. And then you turn it back on again. So now you've saved 2 or 3 hours. And then you do the same thing again in the evening. You come back from the activity, the fridge temperature is, you know, say 3.5 or something, and you turn it off. And you go do, you know, you get cleaned up from the activity, you prepare your dinner, whatever you're doing, keep an eye on it. And depending on the weather outside and everything else, it might get up to 6 or so, and you got to turn it back on again. But the point is that if you're fortunate, you might be able to get 5 or 6 hours where the fridge is not running. And if that's the case, you end up with, you saved almost a quarter of that load, because you can also turn off the inverter as well. You're not using the inverter when you run the fridge when it's on propane. And so you can have a lot of ways to manage things. Remember that with an inverter, a lot of cases, you're converting power from 12 volts to 120, then you're converting it back down to some kind of DC thing for your computer or whatever it is. And all that is just, wasting energy. So one of the things you can get, as I'll show in this video coming up here, is a 12 volt computer charger. Okay. And what happens with that is it's coming out of the cigarette lighter right to the computer without the charge. So we'll put that in here and you can see what I'm talking about. So one of the things I did was install these two 12 volt outlets just here in the kitchen. The one has a USB adapter in it. These are separate lines down straight to the battery with independent fuses, and can give you probably 150 watts or something like that. So these are wonderful because in this particular RV, there are no 12 volt outlets in the coach itself, only here at the front. So it's really quite nice to have. And so I put those in, and I'd recommend in the future any RV that you have, because going straight from the battery to the 12 volt to your appliance is the most efficient path you're going to have, and it saves you wasting electricity. So this is my 12 volt extension cord. The main thing with these is you get a heavy enough cable on them so that you can run it the distance you want. This allows me to take the power from these outlets I mentioned earlier and go right to the back of the living room to use the computer over by the television, because sometimes I use the television as a second monitor for the computer. So these things are really helpful when you do that. Now something else you can get is a computer charger that is run off of 12 volts. So here's the cigarette lighter plug here, and then there's the plug that goes into the computer. And when these things come, they have all the different adapters to them and so on. Now the point here is, if you use the adapter that came with the computer, that's going to be 120 volts. So now you're going to have to take the battery energy, convert it using an inverter to 120, then convert it back down again to some DC voltage the computer requires. So to give you an example, on this particular setup here, this is about, I would say, takes just over half the electricity to do the same job as you would have to use doing it the other way. So we really, I really appreciate having this device here on the computer when we're looking at boondocking, and I don't even bother bringing my other adapter with me. I just use this one in the RV. Because again, and the newer computers, of course, are taking far less power than they ever used to, which also helps with your boondocking, and often they last for longer as well. So the two things conspire to help out with that. Another thing you can do is auxiliary lighting. And so instead of using the RV lights, for example, the overhead lights, you might turn it on and maybe have 7 or 8 lights come on all at the same time. And even though they're LED, it still gets to be a fair bit. You'll have other accent lights, which are often incandescent, which can take a lot of current, and you really need to check that. And that's where your battery monitoring system will come in, because you can actually see how much current those things are taking. And it's, and you can't guess. In the bathroom, I have a 1 light, which is an LED, which takes about 0.2 amps, and I have the 3 lights over the sink that are like stage lighting. They're incandescent. They take 4 amps. So when we use the bathroom, we almost never use those over the sink lights, because again, you just, it's just wasting power, right? So anyhow, so that's another thing you can do, is these auxiliary lights. I bought a couple of these. They work really well, and you simply charge them up. You get about 4 hours. So I'm going to insert that video right here. I got these portable lights off of Amazon, I think maybe $20 or something, and you get 2 of them. They'll give you about 4 hours of light, 3 or 4 colors, and they also will dim. And so what we find is great is that we walk around with them, we can set them down. In the summer, you've got light until maybe 9 or so o'clock at night, so you don't need all that much light anyway. But they're really, really versatile. Sometimes, for example, here, when you turn on the main lights, you're turning on 7 or 8 lights, which is a fair amount of current compared to charging these. So we really enjoy these. Okay, so now we have those devices. The other thing that you can do, of course, is, you know, your solar system is not useful to you after, say, dinner time or whenever, depending on what the sun's doing. And you can check that on your phone. And when that is basically 0, you can go down and turn off your solar controller. It'll be off for maybe 10 hours. That'll save you 3 or 4 amp hours. Now you might say, really? But again, it adds up. You got 3 amp hours here, or 4 or 5 there. Before you know it, it's 10 or 15, and it makes a difference. With the computer use, again, if you're watching videos when it's dark outside or something like that, consider a tablet computer if you have one. The tablet computer takes far less power than a notebook, and will charge quicker anyway. So, sorry, I meant it takes a longer time, probably about 6 or 7 hours before it runs out. So one of the things you can do is the current notebook I have lasts about 4 or 5 hours. So if you use that only for, you know, email or spreadsheet stuff or something like that, and you can try to set it up so you do that in, you know, an hour and a half or 1 hour even, then you'll find you can use that for 3 days without too much bother. Before you leave, you either know you're having internet at the site, which is, you know, one option. Failing that, then you load up your tablet with whatever videos or something that you might think you want to see, and you set up your tablet and off you go. And if it runs for 6 hours, you charge it once a day. It's a small amount of charge compared to the computer. So that's another way you can save some energy. And again, that's all DC to DC because it's a USB charger, so you have very little wastage of power, because again, you don't plug your USB into a 120 converter. That's just wasting power. Instead, you have USB ports in the RV that are coming right from the cigarette lighter, one way or the other, either built-in ones or ports in your RV that you stick an adapter into the cigarette lighter, which gives you the 5 volts odd that is for the USB. So once again, you're not giving away and wasting charge that you don't need to. Another thing you can do is things like puck lights. Some of them come with chargeable or just even AA batteries, and you just tap them, and they're great for, say, reading lights in bed or something like that, where you don't have to use the RV systems. So there's a lot of things like that that you can also do that will modify how your systems work. If you're dealing with comfort in the evening and you're hot or whatever, well, again, you can determine how much clothing you're wearing, but also you can set up the windows with the fan to create a cross breeze, so you have the effect of the wind blowing, and that can work really nicely too. And the Fantastic Fan takes about 18 watts or about an amp, 1.5 amps, which is way cheaper electrically speaking than an air conditioner. And it can well be that that's the cost of camping, and say in a warmer day when the weather's hotter and so forth. So those are some of the electrical procedures, but the main thing, I guess, is if you don't need it, don't use it. Try to turn things off, not in a way to deny everybody. People are getting denied things they want to do. That's going to make the trip kind of be disappointing pretty quickly. But you have to look at saying, okay, what do you want to do, and how can we wangle that so that you can do it? I mentioned in a previous video, so for example, if you're cooking meat or something like that, you can use the barbecue. If you have a barbecue connected to the propane of your RV, or you have your own gas barbecue, that's a much nicer way to make your dinner, and you don't have to run the George Foreman once or twice for, 15 to 20 amp hours. And that can make quite a nice difference. You can even toast over the stove, although it's kind of clardy and inconvenient, and I kind of just resist that because I use the toaster instead. So those are some things that you can do. for operational reasons, to make the electrical system stretch it out a little bit. But the really important thing is you've got to check every day and know what you're really doing, not what you think you're doing. Check your batteries before you go to bed or whatever time you want to do it. Write it down. And when you do your trips, especially when you do these and you improve your procedures, you come up with bright ideas, write it down in a journal or whatever way you want to keep your records. And so that when you go the next time, which might be a month or two later, you'll forget stuff. And then you can go back, have a quick look at this and say, oh yeah, that's right, that worked really well, or that didn't. And then the next trip is run with that knowledge. So this segment is about your use of handling water. What we want to make sure of it is probably as precious as much as electricity is, and you have to be very careful, and it's much harder in fact in many ways to get it back depending on the protocols you're following. So one of the things that we look at is so you're going to use it for washing dishes, washing your hands, and washing yourself in the shower as the primary issues, and then of course in the toilet as appropriate. Now, we never compromise safety, so if it's time for meals, we're going to wash our hands. We're going to use the bathroom, we're going to wash our hands. So we're not going to not do that. Now, there's disinfectant wipes you can use. If that suits you, that's fine. One of the things that you're going to consider washing your hands is you have two basic ways to lather. One is a bar of soap, and the other is a pump, a soap dispenser that's like a pump. So the problem with a bar of soap is it takes a fair amount of water so that you can melt the soap and get a decent lather on your hands. Then you rub your hands, and then ultimately you rinse it off. And you'll find washing your hands that way takes a significant amount of water. Generally, the flow of a RV faucet is about 50 milliliters per second, which means that in 20 seconds you use up a whole liter. That's 3 cans of pop worth of water. And it doesn't take long, and you wonder where it all went. So things like hand washing, if you use a pump dispenser for soft soap or whatever you want, you just open the the tap, pardon me, just to the slightest trickle that you can get your hands wet. Put the pump soap on, smear it around, lather your hands, and then you just, under the same trickle that you turn on again, you can rinse your hands. It takes a little longer, but you're using far less water, and you might end up doing that with maybe 200 milliliters or something like that. It's very effective. And you don't need hot water for that, because in the majority of camping situations, you're going to be camping in the summertime. The water in the hoses of the RV, unless it's just been recently filled, are going to be 20 degrees, 20, 25 degrees. It's room temperature, and it's more than adequate for washing your hands. When it comes to having showers and washing dishes, generally speaking, we do want to heat the water. And you can heat the water for dishes on the stove if you wish to, but and again, it'll depend on the hot water system that your RV has. If you're boondocking, you pretty much have to use propane, because an electrical heated water tank is going to take an enormous amount of battery energy. I find that you can almost time it more than measure it. If you turn on the hot water heater and give it 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you'll find it's probably warm enough to do what you're trying to do. I think my tank is 8 gallons. I can't remember now. But in my experience in our RV with the hot water heater, if we turn it on and say 10-15 minutes later someone goes in and has a shower, I say I have a shower first. And then my wife decides to have a shower. We don't run out of hot water. So I find that unless you're really having the shower really hot, or you're using a lot, you're sitting in there for a long time, it should be fine. We generally don't turn the hot water off until the person has finished rinsing, just in case. Or maybe when someone just goes into the shower, if it's just one person, you turn it off just before you go in. And it just keeps the amount of propane usage reasonable. But again, the hot water heater, unless you are crazy about it, it's not going to take any. The only thing that's really going to kill your propane in an RV is your furnace. That's going to run it down in 3 or 4 days. So as long as you're, you know, use the hot water heater and the stove and these things, they're not a problem when it comes to the propane use. Now, when you first put water in the sink or in the shower, of course you want hot water in the sink. You don't want cold water. What's the point? And you're only going to put in a sink that is smaller, like an RV sink is probably, say, 30 by 40 centimeters. And maybe you're only going to put, you know, maybe 5 centimeters in the sink. And you're going to wash all your dishes for the day probably at once. I like to do them at night before I go to bed, and that way they're dry in the morning, and then we're ready for a new day. Whatever. So if you turn the tap on and wait for the hot water, you're going to let, you know, between half and a full liter of water run down the drain for no meaningful purpose. And maybe you can do that at home where you're connected to the utilities, but you can't do that in an RV. Your tanks will be full in no time. So you can take a pitcher or whatever you want to use, a pot even, and you catch the water that is coming out of the sink until you get hot. And then I generally like to fill the sink completely with hot water. And the hot water from an RV heater is fairly hot. It'll be 130, 140 degrees probably. But because the sink isn't insulated, it doesn't take long and it cools off a little bit. And you can still do what you need to wash your dishes. Now, after I've soaped the dishes and I put them in the other sink, then I got to rinse them. And now you want to be, again, remembering that 20-second rule per liter. You want to rinse them as quickly as you can, but you don't want to leave soap residue on your dishes either. So you just have to use your common sense with that. And then I recommend air drying or paper towels. A dish towel is damp, and if you use it over and over again, all it does is pick up bacteria. And I don't think that that's, you know, really a safe way to do things. So I would air dry things, just leave them in the rack overnight or whatever, it's fine. I have a cookie sheet I put over my sink and leave the dishes sitting on there, and that's also another way to do it. If you're going to leave that day, let them air dry, go do your other tasks, and if they're not dry, take some paper towels and dry them off and put them away. So for your RV sinks, if you have any kind of a choice, you want fairly small ones, and you want two, because one large sink takes up a lot of water, and that's not something that you have in abundance. So you really never want to do it that way, in my view. The other thing that's happening in some of the newer RVs is the sinks are square. Now, I personally think that's a cleaning problem, because the corners are very hard to get the stuff out of. These rounder type sinks I think are terrific. And so when I'm washing dishes here, I'll take the left sink, I'm going to fill it to about there, approximately 5 or 6 centimeters with straight hot water. I put the dishes then on this side, and then I use the spray head here, and it has a broadcast like a spray face to it to spray them off. Now, with glasses and plates, you pretty much have to do them individually, but you can just do a quick burst and get it done. With the cutlery, you can do it all at once. I then have a, I think it's in here actually. So now I have one of these mini dish board things, and it's great. And you can use that for your plates and glasses. And again, most of the time in an RV, you don't have an enormous amount of dishware for one day. Usually it's just 2 of you. You're going to have 5 or 6 plates, a few glasses, cutlery, a pot or 2, and you're done. And so this is one of the things that I would certainly recommend with the sinks, is to keep it on. If you have a large sink, you might want to consider washing in a tub or something which is smaller to restrict the amount of water that you waste on all this. For the shower, it's the same thing. I already mentioned, no, I guess I haven't. So a couple things you can do in the shower that do help is, one is you can change the shower head on the RV, just usually a pretty cheap one anyway, for what they call an oxygenic shower head. The one I like is the Fury. The main logic behind this is, instead of using more water, you use less water at higher speeds. And what I find is that if you because your skin is oily, a lot of times when you just put water on it, unless you really mean business, the water can run right off, and you thought you've wetted yourself and you really haven't. So using the higher pressure shower head, you can wet yourself way more efficiently and use far less water, and it's really effective. So that's one thing that I'm going to insert that little video clip right here. So this is the shower we have in the GT5. I've put hooks along the wall to hang things like bathing suits and so forth. It does have a seat, which we almost never use, and I think both of us would prefer to just to have the space in the shower, and if you really wanted a seat, you could put a small chair in there or something like that. Now the shower head that comes with these things is usually pretty inexpensive, and so what we did is we replaced it with this Oxygenics Fury. You can get it at Canadian Tire. They're about $80. Now the main point with this, with respect to boondocking, is that you want a shower head, and this has many different settings, is you want a shower head, let's get it back here, you want a shower head that gives you some velocity, because that's going to give you a lot more scouring for a given amount of water. And I think it works really well. It's probably got more pressure than the one in the house does, even though the pump here isn't going to be at a higher pressure as a home would be. And this really will reduce your water usage when you're having a shower. So that's something to really think about. And I really like it. It also has a shut-off on the back here. Now this shut-off doesn't completely shut off, it just starts to dribble, but that keeps the temperature the same. So you lather, turn it off, or I'm sorry, make yourself wet, then turn it off, lather, and then turn it back on to rinse. And it's absolutely about as good you're going to have, and I find works pretty well. Rinsing and make yourself wet sometimes can be difficult because the oil in your skin will run it off, and so you need to, you have to really try a little bit to get that on, and you want as much water as possible making the difference for you. So this has been pretty good. And we also place the shower head on the floor when we drive, just in case it falls off for some reason, and so we don't break the shower head or the floor of the shower. Now, the same thing happens in the shower, is that if you're going to have a shower, you're going to turn on the hot water, and you're going to catch the water in your container until you have straight hot water. Now, these containers, what do you do with them? Well, one of the best ways I find to use them is in the toilet. So you can use this water to dump into the toilet instead of using toilet water, and it does a very effective job at washing the bowl. There may be other things that come up that you want to do, and the other thing, of course, is if you have jerry cans and you're ultimately adding to the system, you could pour the water back into those as well if you wish to. Now, the other aspect of the water system that I was going to suggest was the auxiliary gray water tank. So just going to show a picture here. And this is made, I've just forgotten the name, Barker, that's right. Barker is the name. This one is, I think their biggest one, I think it's a 40 gallon or something like that. So it's about 150 liters. The thing's a beast when it's full. But when you're using a Class A RV, at least now you basically have double the size of your gray water tank. And that's wonderful. And that really can extend your trip quite nicely. And the hoses connect right to the port on your tank, and it takes no time at all, and she's full, and it works really well. And there's an eye-ring on the end of the toe, and you put that on your hitch of your vehicle, and then you're supposed to drive no faster than 5 miles an hour and to the location where you can dump it. So that's something you can do on the last day. Now, to fill the tank is the tricky part. And I don't have a video clip for you right now, but it doesn't really matter because each system's different anyway. But here's the basic point. at my where my pump is, there's a hose that comes out that you can use to suck water into the system. Generally, it's used for the antifreeze during the winter time. And then you just reach in and turn a little valve, and that thing works. And then on the other side of the RV is the water bay, where you have the outside shower and all the rest. So what I figured out is the following. Now, in my case, I've got 3 ports. I've got one for the tank rinse, one for the city water, and one to fill the freshwater tank. And you just put the hose on the one you want. And so what I propose to do is to mount an adapter on the bottom of my outside shower, which we never use, and that then comes to a garbage or a garden hose connector, and then I snap that on, and then snap the garden hose onto the tank fill, and then you run the water on that auxiliary hose through the pump, turn the pump on. It's going to run it through to the outside shower. Of course, you turn on the cold water or whatever there, and up it goes into the freshwater tank, and that's going to work great. Now, every RV now has different ways of doing things. I'm a big fan of quick disconnects on garden hoses. I don't know how many times I've tried to screw those things closed in cold temperatures and they leak anyway. Forget it. And so I use Gardena ones. You can use the kind that you like, but I bought enough of these connectors that right now when I use my hoses at the house or for the RV, it's just snap, snap. I don't turn anything on anymore. And I find that these things seal quite nicely. Now, what I did for the little section of hose that I used to connect from the auxiliary shower to the either the black water spray or the fresh water tank, as I took a piece of hose that was long enough and appropriate, and then you can get ones of these Gardena things that are actually like barbs. They slide over, and when you turn them on, they grip tightly and seal off the hose. So it's a great system, and this is going to allow me some versatility as well, because if I'm choosing to dump my tanks and I don't want to, and I'm not in a position where I have pressure to use my black water sprayers, I can use my own external shower to spray in the black water tank. So it's great, and that's really nice to have. Now for the water feed that I was talking about in my video, if I use the outdoor tap here, which is currently broken, I'm going to replace it, put a fitting on here that will work for a garden hose. These are the Gardena couplers, so that you can go click, and then, for example, here I use them as plugs. So here's my freshwater tank fill. So I take the plug off, and you can just snap it on like that, and there's no fuss, no muss. They don't leak, and they've given me excellent service. So the idea then is that you're going to make a connection between this here and this here with this hose. Now, today it's too cold here, -3 or 4 C, to show it properly. But the idea then is you can use the pump to pump the water through this and back into your fresh tank. And it will come, first it gets sucked up through the same hose as you use for your refrigeration material in the fall when you protect the plumbing in the RV. So this innovation for me, I think it's going to work really well, and I'm quite excited about how that will go next year. So, and that doesn't have to require the auxiliary feed either. You can just feed right out of the freshwater tank, especially if you're dumping your tanks at the end of the time. You probably don't worry about what's in the tank anyway. So that way you can suck a fair bit of water from 1 or 2 or however many jerry cans you want to carry into your freshwater tank and extend your trip. And that's pretty neat, and I'm pretty proud I don't have to buy anything new except make this little connector thing. It was already available. It's just a matter of using your RV properly. I would submit that many RVs have these hoses already attached to their pump structures with a through-A valve there, that you could probably inhale some kind of fresh water into your system, and then it's just a matter of how you can get that water to your tank. If your tank has a gravity fill, that's fine too. It's just that those jugs can get awfully heavy, and that can be a problem as well. But if not, if you have an external shower, that gives you pressure, and then you can send that water wherever you want to after. Even if you want to send it to a gravity fill, that's another way to do it too. If you're going from if you brought water or you have it in your jugs, put it in the auxiliary hose in the tank, run your pump, go to the external shower, and put the fitting on it, and then run that garden hose back around and stick it in your gravity fill. I would do that too. It's a hell of a lot easier than trying to lift those 50-pound jugs in the air. But you can find the thing that works for you. But that's certainly a winner for me, as into extending the trip a little bit longer if we're tight for water and things like that. Okay, so that's it for water use. So this is the last segment then on boondocking here, and that's just some loose ends. Potable water, the water you drink. We don't drink out of the taps generally. We have one of those decanter type jugs that you get at the stores. It has about 9 liters in it. And then we have the jerry cans, which have 23 liters, and we just fill it up as we go. I find that in the summer, if you're doing, hiking, canoeing, cycling activities, you can go through 5 or 6 liters a day. And you have to plan for that. But again, if it's a weekly trip and you're doing, 40 liters, you can do that with one jerry can. It's not that bad. So we can see, or maybe 2. I don't know. It just depends. I don't think we're going to drink 6 liters every day anyway. That's a lot. That's like 3, big bottles of pop or something in the volume. I just don't see it. As I mentioned before, the propane, you're not going to run out of propane. If you have any kind of a decent sized tank, and you're just using the stove, the hot water, and the fridge, you might fill it once or twice in the entire summer. It's nothing. Trash is going to pile up, and you've got to be careful. In wilderness sites, you're going to attract visitors, so you have to be mindful of that. And this, of course, includes bears. So you have to be careful the choices you're making there. Now, I understand about being a purist, but if you're having meals, you want to prepare exactly the amount of food that people are going to consume. None of this just make a bowl full and have a third of the bowl left over kind of thing. Figure it out and make enough that whatever you make is gone. Try to use foods that don't have a lot of cutting and wastage. So you don't want to have chicken or steaks. You can get steaks that don't have bones in them and things like that, or too much trim on them. So sirloins are perhaps better than strip loins and things like that, or pork chops that have hardly any fat on them. So that the amount of organic waste is really quite small. That's one thing you can do. Other than that, and the other thing I would suggest too is when you go to the store, when you're packing the RV, like there's a lot of packaging that comes with items from the grocery store, and as much as possible, you can remove that packaging so that when you do use the product, the packaging that's on it's wrapped, say, instead of it being in some kind of other thing, it's wrapped in saran or something like that, so that there's nowhere near the volume of garbage that goes away. That can really help. Things like that. And then I would consider storing the garbage in your vehicle, not in the RV proper. If you're in bear country, you want to be mindful of it. They're human food's attractive, and I think if you're in a vehicle, although that's not to say a bear can't get into it, they got to try a lot harder, I think, than getting into an RV. So that's what I would recommend there. And again, if you're in a campground that has trash, I wouldn't take the chance. I would probably throw it in the trash. Clothing. So if you're gone for a week, you should have enough clothing probably that you can wear, change of clothing every day for the most part, and be fine. You may get days where you fell in the mud or something else happened and you needed some spares. And you may also have performance clothing. So you might have clothing you wear when you're riding your bike or when you're hiking or when you're canoeing that's unique to that sport. And you'll also have to use your common sense as to how much of that you have and whether you can wash it in the sink and hang it up and so on. A lot of these quick dry type materials wash really quickly, and you can put them on a drying rack in your RV, and you come back at the end of the day and they're dry, and you can use them the next day. And that's a really cheap way to do things. And I think I'm near the end of my go here. So I just think this is a fascinating way to travel and to camp with an RV in remote sites and see all of the wonderful things that there are in our natural environment. And with a little bit of effort and a bit of money and at times or reconfiguring, you can do this, and you don't have to sleep in a tent in some places and still really enjoy these places. Remember, if you go to a park and you've got an hour or so, walk around the campsite, the campground rather, and check out the sites that you think would actually work for you, for solar or for size or getting in and all this kind of stuff, and write them down. And then whenever you book this place again, you can go right back to it and say, okay, yeah, right now, site number 20, that's the one we want. And you book it in time as you have it. So it's just a little bit of homework. And it doesn't take much to do it. You can walk around with someone you care about and then really enjoy the natural environment while you write down 4 or 5 numbers. I mean, it's not that big a job. And it's also kind of looking forward to the next trip too. One of the things that I like to do is go to, a decent sized park for a week or 10 days and do pretty much as many trails and things in that park as possible and really experience it. It's a lot more efficient than going back and forth, 3 times to the same place on day trips. Because I think I mentioned earlier, the Jeep I have, which would be the thing I would use in some of these cases, which carries the canoe or the bikes or something like that, it gets about 2.5 times better mileage than the RV does. So after 3 trips, you're better off to come with the RV, aside from the camping expenses. But there's another factor too. You're also having more time. It's nice to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and you're right there. You don't have to drive or go anywhere. You're right there, and you have your breakfast, and you get set up, and you just go out and you pick up your gear, and you're off on the trail or you're off in the park or whatever you're doing, and that's wonderful. And every hobby is going to cost something. But I think that hobbies like this that also give you the enjoyment of the environment and the health benefits of it, I think are well worth it. Okay, thank you for hanging on through this longer video. I hope you found it interesting, and I wish you safe travels, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks for watching.